Hi, everyone. Tonight we're going to start learning a little bit more about another facet of demand, and it has to do with elasticity. So let's get started. I don't think I'm going to make this through this one in 15 minutes, so this might be a really long and boring lecture. Anyway, it's really long. It's like 50 slides. But I thought this was a perfect quote to start with. So stick with it. This is a difficult chapter. And this quote was perfect. Difficulty strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Sometimes I think I'd rather labor. Anyway, so let's think about what we got with elasticity. So if you remember the law of demand, as price increases, demand decreases. Elasticity measures the amount that demand changes as price or income or any other variable that affects demand changes. So elasticity measures the amount that demand changes. We know that when price goes up, demand goes down. Elasticity measures how much demand goes down. So we're going to learn a lot of very interesting formulas. So remember the factors that affect demand. We talked about the 4 factors, one of which is price, and that is the most important factor affecting demand. Income, as your income goes up, you buy more normal goods. The price of substitutes affects demand. And then the one you had the discussion question on last week, consumer tastes and preferences, which is totally personal and kind of not really measured from a elasticity standpoint. For each one of these, we can calculate elasticity, how much demand changes if one of these 3 variables changes. So we have some very interesting formulas, and there are 3 basic elasticity calculations we're going to do in Chapter 5. The first one the book calls own price elasticity. A lot of times I just call it price elasticity, so you're going to get used to me saying that. And then remember your Greek letters, the delta means change. So own price elasticity is the percentage change in quantity demanded by the percentage change in price. So if we're looking at beef, how much it shows us when the price changes, how much demand will change. If price goes up, demand's going to go down. Income elasticity measures how much the change in demand of beef will be if your income changes. So the percentage change in quantity of beef divided by the percentage change in income. And cross price elasticity, which is the most complicated, looks at how a change in one good affects a demand for another good. So the Q is for quantity demanded. So cross price elasticity would look at if the price of chicken changes, how does that affect the demand for beef? Okay, so let's talk about this own price elasticity or just price elasticity of demand. So we can look at it as this percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. And that's an easy way to do that as long as this is already calculated for you and you're given a percent. If you're not given a percent, then you have to resort to this formula right here, which Q is always quantity, P is always price. So we'll continue talking about this here in a minute. You are going to want this formula, and this formula is in your book on page 76. This one as well as this one. Okay, so let's do let's look at how this works. So the QA is for the beginning quantity, and that would correspond with QA right here at some price. Something takes place in the marketplace, and this is the first price. And then in this case, the price is going to decrease. And we're going to see that the quantity demanded increases. Well, what elasticity does is it calculates how much that quantity increases. So QA is your quantity at the beginning, QB is your quantity after a price change, PA is your price in the beginning, and PB is your new price. So you're going to have to plug the numbers in and do the calculations. So this is also in your book, this exact problem. So if you plug those numbers in, if the hamburgers change in price from $1 to $1.25, that's going to be here in your denominator. And then the demand changes from 3 to 2. So obviously if the price goes from $1 up to $1.25, demand will decrease. The law of demand. As price goes up, demand goes down. So we start out with we have to put our, oops, I think I might see a problem in here. We have to put our quantities in. So QA would correspond with, let's see, QA is going to correspond with the first quantity, and QB is going to associate with the second quantity. Anyway, if you put your numbers in, you're going to get what we call an elasticity coefficient. And that elasticity coefficient is expressed as a percentage. So it would be if we raise the price of burgers by 1%, the demand for burgers would decrease by 1.8%. So price goes up by 1%, demand goes down by 1.8. Demand goes down, that's why you have a negative number. Okay. So I said that. So for every 1% increase in price, demand will decrease by 1.8%. That is elasticity coefficient. Since this number, just the rules, since this number is greater than 1, not assuming it's negative, negative means the price decrease, but that number is 1.8. Since it's greater than 1, that means that demand for hamburgers is elastic. We'll talk about that here next. So elastic versus inelastic goods. So when we talk about elasticity, price elasticity of demand, goods can either be elastic or inelastic. So when we change the price of good, the demand changes. If the demand changes a lot, greater than 1%, then that means the good is elastic. Elastic goods have substitutes. So that means when you change the price, the demand changes a lot because people don't buy it anymore. They switch to substitutes. So elastic goods means that they have a strong reaction to a price change because a consumer can buy a substitute. If you think, the price of beef goes up, you would switch to chicken or pork or some other protein. So elastic means the good has substitutes. Inelastic goods, on the other hand, means that the good is unique and a price increase only affects demand a little. And that is when the coefficient is less than 1%. So if the coefficient instead of being 1.8 was 0.43, then that would mean the good is inelastic. Inelastic goods don't have good substitutes. So it doesn't matter what happens to the price. You have to buy it because there is no substitute. A good example of an inelastic good is gasoline or fuel. You have to buy gasoline. You have to get to work. You have to take your kids to school. You have to do all those things. It doesn't matter what the price of gasoline is. The price goes up, you're still going to buy it. You can buy a little bit less, the law of demand, but it's relatively inelastic. So those are the two categories of elasticity when we look at price elasticity of goods. Okay. So a little bit more interpretation. So since elastic goods have substitutes, already kind of covered this, a price increase will lead to a substantial decrease in demand. Consumers switch to substitutes. Therefore, if you're a producer of elastic goods, would you want to raise or lower the price of a good? If goods are elastic, that means they have substitutes. So you would want to lower the price of good, because if you lower the price, consumers are going to buy more of it. So elastic goods, you would lower the price. Inelastic goods are unique goods. So inelastic goods, you have to have no matter what. So if you are a producer of an inelastic good like gasoline or salt, or I used to say milk, but an inelastic good, it doesn't matter what the price is. Consumers are going to buy it no matter what. So you would make more profit if you raise the price of the good because there are no substitutes. You say, oh, well, that's mean. It doesn't matter. It's economics. It's business. You got to make a profit, right? Okay, moving on. So this little chart is a good reference. You might want to come back to it later on. So elasticity coefficient is greater than 1. The good is elastic. And that basically means that you would lower prices to make more profit. Unitary elasticity is if the coefficient is exactly equal to 1. And if the coefficient is less than 1, the good is inelastic, meaning that it has no substitutes and you can raise the price and people are still going to buy that good. Okay, so now your book is talking a little bit about demand curves. Demand curves are always downward sloping. This looks like a bunch of chopsticks. Always downward sloping, but they always have a negative slope. High price means a low quantity demanded. So demand curves come in all shapes. This is a question I think maybe on your homework. Perfectly inelastic. So the quantity, it doesn't matter what the price is, the quantity demanded remains the same. Perfectly elastic is the opposite. Okay. So now they're looking at two demand curves. And these are really interesting. I'm going to show you. Just remember this one, which has a very steep slope, is inelastic. And this one with a very slow, gradual slope is elastic. Okay, so let's look at those real quick. This is kind of interesting. So one single curve, and this is a homework question also, one single curve can have points where it's elastic, points where it has unitary elasticity, and points where it is inelastic. So that is a question on your homework, and it is in the book too. Okay, so this shows you, goes back to this line right here. And it does the calculations of elasticity, and it shows you at the top of that graph the good is considered to be elastic, because those are if you have to use the absolute value because it's a negative slope. The number is greater than 1. Those are elastic. Unitary elasticity, and then down here at the bottom you have inelastic. The number is less than 1, even though we don't use that negative sign. The negative sign just means demand is going down. So, just like I said. Okay, so this is an example of an inelastic or an elastic demand curve and elastic demand curve, that very gradual slope. So it's kind of, I think it's kind of fun. So if you see that your price decreases, so I don't know why they have the letters the way they are, but your price decreases. So you go from point B to point A, you can see that the change in price is less than the change in quantity demanded. The quantity, so a small change in price causes a great change in quantity demanded. That is a characteristic of an elastic good. So if we lower prices, consumers are going to buy a lot more of that good because the other good didn't lower prices, and that would be the substitute. So a decrease in price causes a great increase in quantity demand in an elastic demand curve. Let's skip over this real quick. I want to show you this one. So an inelastic demand curve is that very steep slope. So here we have a price change. Unfortunately, it's not the same as the last one, a little bit bigger price change, but it has very minimal effect on the quantity demanded. So we go from this point to this point, and we barely move at all along the x-axis. So that is inelastic. So in other words, a large price drop doesn't increase demand. It'd be the same too as if it was a large price increase. Demand would only shift a little bit. That is a good example of an inelastic demand curve. So going back to this table, so if the own price elasticity of the good, if the good is elastic, you will increase your revenue if you cut prices. Okay? Unitary elasticity doesn't matter. It's like a mathematical thing. An inelastic good, however, you want to increase your price, and that will increase your revenue. So I know that's complicated, but those are two really good demand curves. Very interesting. So the deal with in agriculture that is kind of halfway interesting, ooh, I'm running out of time, is most agricultural goods are inelastic. Consumers buy the amount of food that they need. It doesn't really matter in general, overall in the big picture. The price of food is not a #1 expenditure in most households. So in general, agricultural goods are inelastic. So it is a challenge when prices decrease, because it decreases revenue tremendously. And that generally is what happens in agriculture. That's bad news. Okay, so let me move on to the next slide. And I think I'm going to call it quits here because that is my first 15 minutes. So I'll be back a little bit